Hey guys, it's Merce. Welcome back to Harpies in the Trees, where I review horror books with a supernatural focus. So I don't know if you noticed, but I have a new intro. I decided to do that this weekend. After I did the Haunted Library tour, I kind of had this revelation. I love reviewing books, but one of the things that I really enjoy the most, I love creating these little tiny experiences, these little microcosms of spooky, I guess. And I think that's what I realized I really want to do with this channel, is sort of start honing it that way. This was just really me kind of celebrating a moment that has been realized by the patrons on my Patreon, by all of the subscribers here. It's allowing me to really embrace a part of myself, I think, that love for spooky and dark things. So that was my new intro. I hope that you liked it. Let me know down below if you did, if you didn't. So I think so last week I put a question out on YouTube where I asked for inspiration, and you guys gave me a lot of really great ideas for videos. Like, all of them are solid gold. Like, I don't think there was one mention there that wasn't like something that, you know, would probably make a great video. So for this week, I looked through the list. I wrote them all down. They're all in my notepad. And I was like, you know, what can I do right now with what I have? I took a suggestion from Deep Arya, who's also an author, and I did review one of his novellas here, The Overbridge. But he left a suggestion, and it was pretty cool, and it was history or inspiration facts behind a horror book. And I thought this is a great idea because there have been some books that I've read either in the foreword or the afterword or the notes or something where, you know, they talk about the inspiration for the books, and I thought that would be really interesting to talk about. So I picked out 3 books. And what the game plan is, I'm going to tell you about the story of the book, and then we're going to go into the author's notes and comments about, you know, what inspired the book. I'll share with you some research I did on my own about some of these events or things related to that event. A few videos ago, I did the review for Venus in the Blind Spot by Junji Ito. And in that video, I shared a little bit of personal information, you know, about my depression. And what I want to say is thank you so much for your just outpouring of support and understanding and being able to relate, or just offering some kind word just to send a little bit of love my way. I really do appreciate that so much. It means a lot to me. I'm also sad to hear that so many of you suffer with the same problem. And I just hope that you know that it's okay to be struggling, and there is help if you are ready for that. But I guess the one good thing about having depression is that I think you feel your humanity. I think it allows you to have empathy for other people. Not always the case, but at least there's this understanding there, you know, the understanding of suffering. And sometimes that's all you need. You just need someone to understand. Thank you so much to all of you again. Remains by Andrew Cull. Now, this is a haunted house story that is centered around grief, centered around the loss of a son. The bereaved mother, she's not able to move on from this grief. She's stuck. She feels as if there's something there, that there's something she's missing, that there's some way to be with him again, to bring him back. And so her whole entire life is kind of just falling to the wayside. Her job, her personal life, her networks, her relationship with her husband, all of these things are just falling apart because she is obsessed with her grief. So she feels as if, you know, that the house is calling to her, that it's pulling to her, and she ends up buying the house and living there. The only thing that she wants out of this house is to see her son again, because this is where he was murdered. So while she's in this house, you know, she's not decorating, she's not cleaning, she's just sort of waiting for a sign, something. And eventually these signs do come, they do appear, and she will end up having to confront more than just her son's death, the loss of her son, the loneliness of being without him. There's also something else that comes through, something else maybe just as needy as she is. One of the first things I did when I received this book was I flipped just, you know, to the very beginning, and there is a small foreword. It's really cool. I would reword it, but it's pretty short. It's just one page. So let me just read this to you because it is really what I guess it got me really worked up. Remains is a work of fiction, but its story is loosely based on recorded events. During the winter of 1974, a series of seances took place in a house in the Burnell Heights district of San Francisco. Over the course of these seances, a young mother claimed to have contacted the son she had recently lost in a car accident. However, the messages she received, both by using a Ouija board and later through a spiritualist medium, alarmed her to such an extent that she contacted a local priest for help. After the seances had taken place, the woman claimed to have felt that something unseen was following her around her home, and more disturbingly, that at night shadows massed around her bed and attempted to choke her. When an exorcism at the house failed to yield any respite in the haunting, the woman contacted a British paranormal investigator and friend of our family who would, many years later, relay the story to me. So this is a personal story from Andrew Cull's family. This is something that, you know, they sat around the couch with their friend talking about the weather, and then, you know, this story came up somehow. You know, I wonder how old he was when he learned of this story, and, you know, how long it stuck with him, and how, you know, it probably inspired him for a very long time before he wrote this book. While many of the events of that winter could be attributed to a mother's grief, she was later committed to a psychiatric hospital. The messages she received while conducting the seances were so disturbing that they stayed with our family friend long after his investigation had ended. I've read and heard many ghost stories, many from surprisingly credible sources, but this one has haunted me more than any other. I tried to do some research, and I tried to look up this house in San Francisco to see, you know, if there was anything in the journalistic aspect of what had happened there, but I couldn't find anything. So instead, I found a true haunted house case located in the San Francisco area, which is where Burnell Heights is. So this house is located in the Russia Hills section of San Francisco, and the name of the house, I guess known on the street to fellow ghost hunters, is House of Demons. The house was owned by a gentleman named J.P. Monroe, who was a civil engineer in the mid-1800s. He was a pretty happy man, and he adored his beautiful wife, and he had a great job, and everything seemed to be very, very peachy keen, until his wife's sister and niece arrived at their front door. The sister and the niece had been traveling around Hawaii and just happened to be in the area. But what was very unusual about their visit was not so much that Monroe wasn't too keen on them being there. It was more that after they had arrived, very strange things began to happen in that house. Things that had never happened before. Things like, I don't know, an axe being thrown at your head? Don't worry, it missed Monroe by inches and he survived. But the disturbances were so concerning to Monroe that he consulted his friends and confided in them and told them what was happening in his house. Both of them were professionals, rational-minded people, a lawyer and another engineer. But instead of finding rational reasons for these unusual disturbances, his two friends come up with the idea that, we really need to do a seance, call these spirits up and see what their deal is. So on September 19th, 1895, they prepared to do a seance. I wish I could have been there for this. I wish I could go back in time and just see little tiny events like this that you read about. For instance, I would love to go back in time and see H.H. Holmes's house being constructed, his murder house. So that night, the whole family, including their two friends, sat around a round table. They put their hands onto the table and they began to summon the spirits. It was a move they would soon regret. So as they have their hands on the tables, waiting, anticipating, so thirsty for something exciting to happen, they referred to it as a tornado of activity. Furniture and books and tchotchkes and everything flying around the room. And as this tornado of domestic goods is just churning and turning in the air, out emerges a dark figure. So menacing, so vile, so horrifying that everyone fled out of the house. After that, nobody really cared to come around anymore. The house was now forever known as the Demon House, and it was torn down in December of 1916. In The Plague Stones by James Brogden, we have a family who is in crisis. This family is a mother and father and a teen son. They live in a pretty bad part of town, just not safe. There's a lot of crime, the schools are not very good. But one night, mom and dad decide to go out for a little bit, just go on just a little date. This is okay with the son because he kind of just wants to hang out online with his friends and, play some video games. And it starts off that way until Toby, their son, sees something in the monitor reflected. He sees a shadow. He turns around and it ends up being a burglar. This burglar not only ends up stealing from his parents, but also beating him and humiliating him. So this is the last straw for his parents, and they're determined that this won't happen again because Toby actually ends up in the hospital. And as they're fretting and they're trying to figure out what they're gonna do, they get a phone call from this man who tells Trish, the mother, her great aunt has passed away, and that this great aunt was a kind of a custodian or caretaker of a medieval home of some village that's 2 hours outside of the city. And they were wondering if she would like to come and be the new custodian or caretaker because it's usually passed down generation to generation. It's safe and it's beautiful and it's in the country and the schools are very, very good and there's very little crime, if any at all. So of course they agree to this. They move there with their son, but as they're settling in, it's becoming more and more clear that there is a lot that this society, this association isn't telling them something very dark lurking the perimeter of it. So James Brogden has an afterword in the back where he talks about his inspiration for the entity of the story. So this might be a mild spoiler, but if we're talking about inspirations and backstories and stuff, I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to tell you a little bit about the entity here. So the main entity, maybe more like the master entity behind the scenes in this book, is based off of a Norwegian folklore character named Pesta. Pesta is a Norwegian word that means pandemic. So Pesta is the anthropomorphic idea or concept of the plague, and most specifically like how the plague moves from person to person, from village to village. So Pesta was an old woman. She was gaunt, she looked deathly, she usually kind of had, you know, the trappings of an old woman, you know, headscarf and apron. And her apron was usually red, and I'm assuming the red because red for blood, right? Like it's blood stained. She traveled from community to community in her red apron, and she had two weapons of choice. She had a rake and a broom. And if you saw Pesta with a broom, you were fucked. It's like everyone's gonna die, everyone's gonna get swept up into the dustbin, and that's it. But if it was a rake, a few people would be able to escape through the holes of the rake. So one of the two, you had, you know, pretty shitty, kind of shitty, but you might escape. She would walk from, you know, village to village, farm to farm, house to house, and just spreading the plague, you know, just one step at a time.
Just spreading that disease.
The plague was believed to come to Norway by a ghost ship. So it is believed that this actually happened, that there was a ship that arrived in Norway, and this is how the plague came there. It was just from this crew that had been consumed by the plague. So after the boat arrives to Norway, Pesta, according to James Brogden, along with the disease, tales began to spread of a terrifying hag called Pesta, who traveled from town to town and village to village, killing all she met. Pesta wore a black hood. She was old and bent-backed, and she carried either a broom or a rake to sweep away the lives before her. She was a force of nature given form, a plague hag, a goddess of death. Similar figures in British folklore include the Calais, a female creator deity from Scotland and Ireland, also known as the Queen of Winter or the Veiled One, as well as the, these names are very hard, Wraith from Wales, a wailing banshee-like specter. So James takes Pesta and kind of, you know, takes some creative license, and he sort of creates his own British plague hag version, I guess, and he sets her loose within this story of the plague stones. And this perimeter that goes around the house is it's supposed to keep this pestilence, this plague, this entity out of whatever's inside of it. So it has this type of magic to it, and it's something that Hestia is always trying to break through. So it's really, really cool. So that was Pesta, the plague hag. This takes place in the mid-1800s, 1866 to be exact, in England. And this is about a young priest who has some very unusual talents. He is sort of has the sight for supernatural things, but he's also very, very talented at exorcisms. So one of the things that he does is he helps people out with their hauntings, their whatever unnatural, supernatural problems they may have, he helps them out with those. And in this story, him and his sister, who have been asked by the archdiocese to help out this Lady Seaton. Lady Seaton lives in the countryside in a very beautiful manor house. She has a pretty large property. She's also a widow, but her problems are that she is seeing things like pools of blood on the floor. She's seeing shadows and hearing voices, and also the staff is become very disturbed as well. The archdiocese has asked the young priest to go and investigate and find out what's going on. Is it supernatural? Does the church need to be involved? All that good stuff. So things are definitely going down. Things are getting weird. Not just in the sense of the activity, but also the young priest is poking his nose into a lot of things, trying to, figure out what's going on. And he's learning a lot. There's supernatural things that he's learning that nobody else knows. There's documents and papers and letters and things that are giving him a little more insight into the family that Lady Seaton has married into. So we get to see a lot of different dimensions of the reality that she's existing in. Meanwhile, she's sort of a target. So whatever is haunting or possessing the home or the land, is wanting to get to her. And this is what Lady Seaton is trying to prevent, because she knows a little bit of the history of the family and really doesn't want to fall into the same traps, I guess we could say. So Pete Doherty, he is not only a writer of supernatural horror, gothic horror. I think he also does kind of a mix of like archaeology and theology and adventure horror type stuff. But he's also a historian. So because he's a historian, he brings in interesting things that you wouldn't expect, because I think we all get pretty familiar with some of the same things that we're always going to see over and over again. And he also has access because he was working, or he works at a Catholic school or college. So he probably has access to their libraries as well. In this historical note that he has, he talks about something called the Tridentine Rite. This is what our young priest in our story, he uses for his exorcism. So this is what he recognizes, and that's what he uses. And he says, the spiritual phenomena depicted in the novel have been culled from ones I have learnt about over the years. The office of exorcist still exists in the Catholic Church, appointed solely by their bishop. These exorcists often do their work in great secrecy. The Church is still reluctant, as it always has been, to publicize such occasions. One of the things that I thought was so funny is like when he's doing the exorcism, the entity calls him the funniest thing. He calls him a bunch of names, but...
You stupid wench, feckless noddle-pate.
Which I have no idea what a noddle-pate is, but I guess I should look it up. So I tried to look up the Tridentine Rite, and I couldn't really find anything that seemed like it was specifically that. But I was curious, I am curious about what are the actual steps to recognizing a possessed person? What are the steps to performing an exorcism? So the signs if you are possessed. The first thing is, if someone does the sign of the cross at you and you have a adverse reaction, that's definitely one sign. If you are saying anything against the Catholic faith, second sign. If you are expressing a lot of despair or pride or vainglory, you might be possessed. If you refuse to have a conversation with the priest about possession. If you are really smelly, really stinky, when you spend time with people and they leave your presence and they feel despair and sadness and feel as if their mind and their soul is extremely disturbed, these are the signs that you might be possessed. So what are the steps for exorcising the demon from your dark soul? Well, it's only 6 steps. It's easy peasy, no problem. 1, the presence. Once you have your priest and his team all assembled into your wherever it is that you're nesting at the moment, they are going to need to make sure that they feel a presence, something that's going to prove to them that there is an entity in the room. 2, pretense. You're going to have a very strong urge to start acting like the victim. Woe is me, poor me, how can you do this to me? Really just trying to play on the hearts of the exorcist team. However, it is the job of the exorcist to break this pretense and begin the digging of finding out what your real name is. 3, breakpoint. Now at the breakpoint, you're going to be feeling a lot of anxiety and stress and panic because your scheme of pretending that you're just a little itty bitty kitty is not working. So now it's time for a tantrum. And this tantrum can be all kinds of stuff. It can be verbal abuse, physical abuse, screams, howls, stenches, projecting horrible visions into the minds of the exorcists. So anything that you can do that's going to get them off their game, just sort of get their defenses down. But because this is happening, it's a really big tell though, because demons, live in the skin bags that are humans. So when they panic and when they stress, they forget that they're supposed to be using their puppet to speak for them. But in this case, during the break point, you start talking in first person about yourself and third person about your meat bag. 4, the voice. Once the possessed begins to speak in a altered voice, whether that's or multiple voices, this is also part of the breakpoint. This is kind of the veil being lifted. But before the priest can continue and move on with the exorcism, he needs his demon to shut the fuck up. 5, the clash. When your voice gets tired and finally dies out, you're not giving up, but you're not making a lot of headway either. You're kind of just locked shields at this point. This is the point where the exorcist will start asking you questions, because one of the goals of the exorcist is to learn more about you, to learn more about hell, to learn more about why you're here, how do you get here, how do we keep you out type of thing. So this is the moment where they're going to be trying to break you down and ask you questions and find out what your name is. And once you give up your name, you know that you no longer have any more control. The last step, 6, is expulsion. And this is the moment when the demon is then thrust out of the possessed body and back into hell. Sometimes when this happens, the sound of growling or hissing, strange voices, things like that can be heard receding into the corners of the room. The victim will usually make a full recovery and sometimes not remember anything about the possession at all. So if you're a demon and you're looking for a body to possess, remember, never tell them your name. Well, I hope that you enjoyed this video. It's always fun for me to do some more research on books that I like, because I tend to like books that have a kernel of truth in them anyway. And so it's always really cool to kind of find out where it comes from. And I will be doing more of these videos based on the ideas that you guys have sent me. If you like this video, please like and subscribe. I would appreciate that so much. Thank you so much to the Blood Crones for supporting this channel. It means everything to me. Thank you. If you want to follow me on Instagram, you can follow me there at Harpies in the Trees. Please take care of yourselves, wear a mask, and watch out for each other. I will talk to you next time.